All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm Harry Surden. I'm Associate Director of the Stanford CodeX Center here and also a Professor of Law at the University of Colorado. And it's my pleasure to moderate this very interesting panel on the implications on the latest breakthroughs in large language models. Thanks so much to Roland and the rest of the Stanford team here for putting together such an excellent conference. So I think there's going to be a lot of impact of large language models on law, and we need to start thinking about it now. And we're going to have our expert panel talk about this. But before I introduce them, I think it's important, there's various degrees of knowledge about GPT and ChatGPT. Some people here are experts and understood the last presentation. Some maybe need to be brought a little bit up to speed. So I'm just going to do a little brief overview and then get right into our expert panel. We'll talk a little bit about what are large language models, what can they do today, and then our expert panels will discuss this. So what are GPT and large language models? So we're probably familiar what they can do in terms of funny text generation. So here you can get it to write an application to Stanford Law School from Harry Potter. So it's able to generate, lifelike text. But it's much more than that, as we will see. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So we're going to break down each one of those words separately to understand what they mean. So it's called generative. Generative AI is a class of artificial intelligence techniques that are primarily focused on producing things like text, things like art, things like music, right? As opposed to other approaches that AI can be put to, such as classification. So GPT, its goal is to generate text. The P stands for pre-trained. So what does that mean? It means that it ingests large amounts of text and through its architecture learns how to predict the next word. So GPT-4, which is the latest model from OpenAI, we don't know what it was trained on because it's very secretive, but it said it's trained on much of the internet, millions of books, probably most of the laws it reads in, and often will take anywhere from weeks to months to train it and thousands of GPUs. And its whole goal is to find patterns in these texts. So because these are trained on billions of words of written language, AI systems like GPT are known as large language models, or LLMs. So you'll see that put out there. And then the final letter is T, that's transformer. This is an architecture invented by Google, 2017, Google Brain, in a famous paper called Attention is All You Need. And roughly speaking, it allows large language models and other AI models to focus and pay attention and learn patterns to what's important in text, whether context or meaning or language relationships. And the transformer architecture is an example of a broader form of AI approaches known as deep learning neural networks. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about GPT because in my opinion, especially GPT-4, it's the leading large language model, although there are competitors, and I think Anthropic's Claude Plus is quite good too. OpenAI built on Google's transformer architecture and made a lot of significant improvements and breakthroughs, particularly in instruction fine-tuning, where they kind of taught it how to respond appropriately, and then reinforcement learning from human feedback, where they had humans rank responses and kind of taught the model how to figure out what's a good response and what's not. And then there were 5 main versions of GPT that were publicly released. GPT-1 in 2018, GPT-2 in 2019, GPT-3 in 2020, ChatGPT, which used, let's call it GPT 3.5 in November 22, and GPT-4, which is the most advanced version, which I will talk about today. So GPT-3 in 2020 was pretty good at generating text, but most people, including myself, thought it wasn't that good for anything else other than producing lifelike text, like news copy or stories. In fact, I've been testing this for years. I've been playing around with these for a while, and it actually wasn't that good. So luckily, there's kind of a frozen in time aspect to GPT, where you can see what the old models were capable of. So if you see, I asked it, I used to ask it common sense questions. How many legs does an apple have? And it would say 6, right? So write a motion for summary judgment. This is what it did. So understandably, like Dan Katz, we thought it was 5 years, 10 years, maybe longer before it would start producing good output. But we were totally wrong because we didn't realize what OpenAI was doing with their Instruct GPT and instruction fine-tuning and reinforcement learning. So in November 22, they released ChatGPT, which we'll call GPT 3.5. And it was pretty amazing. It astonished me and anyone else, I think, who wasn't in OpenAI had seen this from its capabilities. And ChatGPT is a conversational interface, a chatbot, to some underlying model. Today, you can access either 3.5 for free, so most of what people aren't paying for are getting the 3.5, the quote older model from November. And then if you pay, you can get the newer model, GPT-4, from March. So all of my examples are going to be from GPT-4. So I think there were 2 things that really surprised researchers. So we all expected GPT, because it's a generative text based upon predicting text, to be able to write good stuff. We did not expect it, at least I didn't expect it based upon my testing, to be good at reasoning and problem solving. This was extremely surprising to me. So, you can give it riddles like this, and it can solve riddles that are too hard for me to solve and lots of other people's, instantly. So that was kind of shocking to most people because we thought it was just a text predictor. And then the other amazing ability was its ability to understand natural language understanding. So before, systems really couldn't understand arbitrary instruction or meaning or intention and really respond appropriately. And GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 could. And this is kind of amazing. So I'm just going to run through a couple things that I've been experimenting with this in law, and we'll see what it can do in law. And this is all GPT-4. So the first thing researchers like myself realized, wow, GPT-4 can generate legal documents. So here's it generating a motion to dismiss based upon bare-bone facts, and it's filling in the law and the text in federal court, and it's really good. I mean, it's as good as anything a lawyer could draft, and you can get it. This is right out of the box, by the way. You can get it better with prompt engineering and priming the prompt. You can get it to write a patent application. So here's an imaginary substance called axolotlite, because I like axolotls, in an air purifier, and it can generate it right off the bat. It can generate plausible patent claims. Here's it generating a merger agreement between 2 companies, as good a merger agreement as I've seen between anyone written on arbitrary text. And notice it's filling in all the details. It's not getting it wrong. I've been playing with it. It can, just like Dan, he figured out that it can engage in legal reasoning. So this is a really hard hypothetical here, and you can get it. It's an evidence hypothetical that most people get wrong. Only 10% of students get it right. And it can do it, and not only do it, explain its reasoning, how it got to the answer it did, citing the law. So to see it in action, I think, is kind of amazing, telling you the correct evidence. And version 3.5 couldn't do this. Version 3.5 would get this wrong, but version 4 got it right. So in my opinion, it's hard to impress me. I've been studying for 15 years. I am not one to engage in hyperbole. I am impressed by GPT-4, like really impressed. I'm usually very skeptical, and I, like Dan, am amazed by this. I think this is the biggest breakthrough in AI. But it also has its limitations. It would be a mistake just to dive into law using it without understanding its limitations. So understanding that, let me introduce our excellent panel. In the interest of time, I'll only provide a short introductions, but they're very accomplished, and I encourage you to look at their biographies in the panel. First is Marcin Detnecki, PhD, who's Chief Data Scientist and Head of AI Research at AXA Insurance. Next is Professor Gillian Hatfield, who's a Professor of Law and Professor of Strategic Management and holds a Schwartz Reisman Chair in Technology and Society at the University of Toronto. She's also an advisor to OpenAI. Next is Jesse Hahn, a PhD computer scientist who has been at the forefront of these developments, having recently worked at OpenAI on many of these large language model projects. Next is Dr. Megan Ma, who's not only a fellow here at CodeX, but who's also an expert on the impact of artificial intelligence and law. And last but not least is computer science Bogdana Rakova, who is a fellow of senior trustworthy AI research at Mozilla and is expert in machine learning. So please join me in welcoming this expert panel. So my first question will be for Marchand, and then we'll open up to the rest of the audience. So in your opinion, what are some of the most interesting uses of these new large language model technologies such as GPT-4, and how is it an advancement over earlier AI technologies?
Yeah, so I think you said a lot about that. I have been in research in artificial intelligence for also a lot of years. I don't know, maybe more than 20. And I think what is really different here is, and I'm really surprised actually to share that, it's that these things are I don't know if we can call them intelligence, but they do mimic intelligence, okay? So if you think about it, what is really different is that these systems were trained, basically the first layer, I mean, not everything is purely that, but it's trained by trying to predict the next word and ingesting a huge amount of data, right? And then so kind of you all suspect, or humans, we suspect that, okay, they will reproduce something it saw somewhere in the internet, right? And turns out that this is kind of now showing some behaviors, and some of them is this reasoning thing that appears somehow magically here, and this is really, really amazing. So, but before going into the real amazing part, I think the other aspect is that does everything that you dreamed before to do with NLP, meaning natural language processing. So you can do like summaries, you can do improved classification, you can extract stuff from some contracts that you want to fill up some forms, you can find documents, you can find, you can recommend things, you can generate so-called start if you want to write something, you kind of have a first draft, you can have digital avatars conversation. So this is just one single model. So you don't need a model for each, which we used to have. Now everything can be done by this. Extra nice feature is that it's able to translate, but I think what is really new also here, and I know this is by chance, is it's able to program. And if you think about programming, programming is the language of the machines. It's the way we communicate with machines. So now this thing will allow us to talk to machines. And it will allow us to, in natural language, pilot a robot, program your agenda, do something with these things. So it's really amazing, this. So, but this stays in the natural language processing, I would say, domain. I just want to tell you that I'm really surprised about this reasoning thing. Because I don't know anything about law, so I try a little bit on mathematics. And it's difficult to benchmark, by the way, these systems because it has taken so many examples from internet that it's difficult to come up with an example it has not seen in some sense. So that's already a challenge. But you think about reasoning, it's able to make some mathematics from simple problems and not that simple problems correctly, even if they are counterintuitive. So we play with Harry. The other day I showed him one example, and it does it correctly. So reasoning was mentioned a lot, so I wanted to insist on another thing. It's common sense. So we're like, okay, this is statistics. These are our parrots, stochastical parrots, okay? Well, you can ask, and this is very amazing, that it was able to learn some things about our world. You can ask, for example, a very simple quiz, is that somebody's carrying something and hiding in the house, and there are different people, and then you ask, who knows what? Okay, so, and it will tell you correctly who knows what. So it has to have a sort of a representation of what the world is, because it has to know who is carrying, who has, that the person, if it's not there, doesn't know where the object is going to be hidden. Second example. Third example, very quickly, is that you can ask also to kind of position things. Let's make a tower, and you say, you describe the object. You say, I have a nail, an egg on whatever, something, and then how would you organize this? It will tell you correctly that the larger officer should be in a lower position and so on. So it kind of capture, I'm not saying it has common sense, but it did capture this. And I think this is really what is revolutionary in this technology.
That's great, so helpful. So I'm hearing some emergent properties that have surprised you. Let me throw this out to the rest of the panel. What are some of the most interesting uses or capabilities of this new technology compared to previous AI? Anyone want to weigh in on that? All right. Well.
I think
Oh,
we
yeah.
were all just deciding who was going to go.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Jillian, do you want to go? Yeah.
So I think part of the point. Let's see. Can you hear me if I don't put that in there? Yes. All right. Okay. I think part of the silence here is we don't yet know because we haven't. I mean, it's been out for how long? A month and a half. And not everybody has access to it. We haven't done all the studies. I mean, I've played around with it, and I'm just stunned by the causal reasoning it can engage in. And so I think there's a lot about the capabilities that we don't know, and I think it's really important because there's a lot of conversation. Thanks for the reference to the stochastic parrots. Because the fact that it's built by predicting, fundamentally built by predicting the next word, and then fine-tuned with human labeling for what's a better way to complete the sentence. There's this idea that's all it's doing. And I think the thing that's stunning is that, the reason we don't know how many parameters. We know that GPT-3 was 175 billion parameters. We don't know how many parameters in GPT-4. It's clearly building representations of a lot internally. I think we don't know what all the capabilities are. So maybe that's part of the silence that you're getting. I don't know if others have played it.
You're absolutely right. And it's hard to believe it's only been out for a month. Yeah. It seems like a year given all the changes that have happened. Megan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I think that in part something that's fascinated me about this is the reach of the technology. I think a lot of it seems like, there are certain types of AI models that you might say are have a tendency to be leaning towards one domain or another. Here, it seems everyone wants to get in on it, and I think to Professor Hatfield's point is that we haven't actually figured out quite yet those capabilities, and I think we need to have a more sensitive understanding of the risks against the benefits. Right now, I think it's very much eclipsing some of the efforts that are being done to evaluate and audit some of these models, and I think we will have to see kind of in the coming maybe weeks or days. On Twitter earlier today, I saw, the generative agents paper, which came out not too long ago. Someone called it that it was so yesterday. And quite literally, it was so yesterday. So I think it will we shouldn't be not only impressed by what it can do, but also impressed by what it can do to your, I guess, existing behaviors and those nudges that will kind of be warning signs that will.
Yeah, this is a great point. It's definitely going to be disruptive. There's going to be positive and bad effects, but the only thing we cannot do is ignore this technology. It's here and it's powerful for good or for bad. Did anyone else want to? Bobby? No?
Well, perhaps adding to that, the conversational form of interacting with it really minimizes the boundary of more people having access to it, and that's really fascinating.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. This one's for Jesse. So Jesse, you were involved in some capacity in this technology, so great to have you here. What do you see as some of the limits of this technology? And then important, I want to talk about limits that are limits of today, because it's experimental technology. Like some people talk about maybe there's a path forward to reducing hallucinations, so where there's a clear path forward, and then fundamental limitations. Love to hear more about that, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. So there are a lot of technical limitations, which, if taken at face value, sort of resemble the limitations that surrounded the early microcomputers back in the 70s and the 80s, right? There are problems of memory size, of how much information the models can process, of hardware constraints, and I think that those will all go away very soon. I think, more fundamentally, a key limitation that these models have, or rather the set of limitations that these models have, are going to very closely resemble the kinds of limitations that humans have. One thing that I've realized from doing so much prompt engineering with language models is that convincing a model to do something is really the same as convincing a human to do something. As lawyers, you guys must do a lot of arguing, and I would argue that the art of argument is convincing an actor to remain consistent within a given narrative, which sounds an awful lot like prompt engineering. So I recently watched the movie Elysium, a few days ago, and there's this really interesting scene where Matt Damon, who's like this compulsive car thief, has to talk to a robot parole officer. And if you guys see the scene, it's literally like a plastic mannequin that has a chatbot inside. And Matt Damon's talking to this thing, trying to convince it, to not go super hard on him. And this mannequin basically abuses him and tries to force him to take drugs, accuses him of abusing it and so on. And I think that my main takeaway from that is that the singularity is going to be very banal. Right, it's going to be incredibly insidious because such a manipulative mannequin could be built right now. You could build it with Whisper, access to ChatGPT plugins, text-to-synthesis tools, and all you would have to do is go deploy them, and you would have an automation of some part of the legal system. And I think a question that we should ask ourselves is, well, is that what the future of law is going to look like? The parallel between the banality of the singularity and the banality of evil is completely intentional here, because I think that there's a similar moral duty to address the limitations of the kind of algorithmic systems that we build around ourselves. If you believe Stephen Wolfram's take that there's going to be a sort of new computational language through which we interface with with these artificially intelligent systems, I think the consequences of that extend equally well to the sorts of processes and institutions that we set up to manage the exponentially larger volume of completely automated intelligent systems that will be operating in our society. And so I think the fundamental limitations of such systems will look more and more like the limitations of human institutions and human beings themselves. And the fundamental problem of how do you steer, how do you align systems which are involved deeply in our legal processes will be equal parts programming, software engineering, algorithmic design, AI research, and policy.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. That's a really interesting take. And one of the points I want to draw out of that is we are not passive recipients of a predetermined technological future. It's up to us to steer our own society to the future that we want to have. And that's going to take a lot of work and conscious forethought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me toss that question out to the rest of the group. Where you see limits, Martin?
Yeah, there are a lot actually limits, and I wanted to build on your fact that it's difficult actually to update this system. And if you think about it, I mean, it's not just stubborn. Is that let's say I don't know anything about law, but I know that we have business rules in companies, right? And if business rules change, you change the business rule, and that's it. You change the rule. Here you have a system, so how are you going to do that? Are you going to change all the prompts you have just to tell them each time, hey, by the way, there is a new rule we have, and suddenly your prompt is exponentially big because you're putting the rules in the prompts? So updating this, especially when there's not that much data, right? Because it's a data-driven technology. So patching these things is the thing. As we already heard, there is a thing about training the whole thing. It's big. So well, I will not enter into that because there are some solutions, short-term ones. I think the second topic I wanted very quickly to touch upon, and it was mentioned today already, is trust. So how we're going to trust the thing, right? And it's a little bit different than with humans. I don't know if you're the same like me, but when my GPS gets something wrong, I really get pissed. Well, if somebody gets lost, it's not that bad. And how we're going to trust this, how we're going to prove that what the thing said, or the explanation. Some people are like, okay, I want an explanation, but okay, fine, it gives an explanation. Explanation sounds good. Okay, do I trust this explanation? And by the way, another problem is, what if it's telling something which is convincingly true, but it's not true, and then how you spot errors? That's kind of a lot of limitations. I can keep going, but I want to hear from others.
Anyone else comment on the limitations? Jillian.
Yeah. So, boy, we may not get to the rest of the discussion on this panel if we head too far down this path of how we think about alignment, policy, regulation, trust. This is actually what I spend pretty much all my time thinking about for the last 5 or 6 years, and these are massive concerns. And I think they're ones that people in law absolutely need to be fundamentally engaged in. But I think we also have a lot to bring to the picture, which is to say, so I keep saying about, GPT is out there, the raw system, and it's behaving in the world in an absolute vacuum of any kind of legal structure around it. And that's not how we do anything. So we're gonna, I want to get a chance to pick up on Ralph's comments from our opening keynote, beat up on our regulatory systems, because I think they're going to limit our capacity to really, really get the fantastic gains we can get from this technology for access to justice. But at the same time, the idea that we don't have a regulatory structure around it at all is really important. So I also want to really emphasize a couple of things just about the technology and the training, and remind you about what Pablo talked about with case counsel. That is a system built on top of GPT, which precisely addresses this question of, is it valid, is it reliable, can you point me to your sources? They've solved that problem. Right? And that's how we should be thinking about most of the structure that is getting built on top of. This is like the raw, you wouldn't hire the raw, even graduate of Stanford Law School, or the person who's admitted, for your legal advice. We need to have processes around it to provide that confidence, and we just need to build the systems to oversee that. So I think that's a really critical piece. I really think for better or worse, ChatGPT altered the universe. With the release in so many different ways, both with the technology and with the policy conversation. But I think it's really critical to remember it's the raw system, and we build on top of that. We build technology on top of that. We build regulatory structures on top of that. We can address all these questions, and we don't want to think, we just have this raw system walking around in our world now, literally, probably in some cases. We don't have any, no, we got lots of tools, and we got lots of expertise in the room about how to address that. So I do want to really emphasize that we build around it, and we shouldn't be just thinking about the performance of the raw system. So Marcian, you mentioned sort of the updating. Well, Pablo's addressed that, right? That's right, it's exactly right. It goes out, it looks at current law, and it's only citing current law. So there are ways to do that they're not involved with prompt engineering. I think prompt engineering is probably going away. I would guess within a year we won't really be talking about prompt engineering. But I think those things are going. The last thing, just to on the technology, and Harry mentioned it. Really, I think really important to understand that ChatGPT, GPT-4 were not built only with this prediction of the next word. They were built with these human labels. Both here's an example of a human answer, and here's human scoring of good answers, and then the use of reinforcement learning. Figure out how to get a higher score from humans on your completion to that prompt, or your answer to the question. So we all have to be thinking about, who are those humans? Where are those labels coming from? What kinds of instructions are those labelers getting? That's another place in which we intervene, both either in the building of the system, or we should be thinking from a regulatory point of view, either a fine-tuned version or in the raw system. This is how we need those labels to be developed, and this is what we need to know about it as a sort of transparency point. So there's actually a lot of human component in there, and I think that's also why we've all experienced this huge leap. It surprised everybody in OpenAI as well, I think, the huge leap with the instruct methods.
Yeah, that's terrific. So just to sum up 2 comments I heard from you. One is we need to build processes on top of the raw product. So a lot of people are engaging directly with the raw product and not kind of taking the next leap that we're not going to be interfacing directly with it. We'll have systems that will check veracity and reduce hallucination. And the other important point I heard, which is kind of interesting and maybe worrisome, I've heard that for GPT-4, some of the reinforcement learning was done potentially by other AI systems. So rather than using...
Yeah, so the way it works is you have humans, you give humans a set of, we're calling them the completions, but they're the answer to questions, they're the list, they're whatever it's producing in response to the prompt. You give those to humans, you get those scored. And then you train a model to be good at predicting how humans would score the answer. And then you give that reward that's designed in that process. Is called reward modeling. You give that to the system to train.
Well, I think at least it's Stanford's Llama model. They used either GPT 3.5 or 3.4 to stand in for the human doing the input-output pairs rather than having humans. So that could potentially be worrisome path of the future, completely taking humans out of it.
You want transparency and the capacity to check how well does it do. I mean, anybody who's done a research project and hired some students to label things, right? Hopefully you're getting some checks on interlabeler agreement and you're doing some audits to see how they're audit. So you have to do the same thing when you're just, you can in fact train the machine to get good at, one of the things it can do is get good at, oh, a human would think this was a good answer because I've seen enough examples of what humans think are good answers.
Yeah, those are great comments. So I'm going to turn to Megan, because I know you've thought quite a lot about this. Where do you see these technologies being usefully deployed by lawyers, either today or in the near future, and what are some of the benefits and risks?
Yeah, thanks so much, Harry, for that. It's a great question. So as I sort of alluded to, I like to think of it as the experience of fear and excitement sends very similar physiological responses to the bodies. And in the same way that we think about fear and excitement, or we react to fear and excitement, I think that's how we should be framing benefits and risks together. Right now we see quite a few of these landscaping and these really incredible efforts that are deep dives into auditing, evaluations, but we don't actually have quite a common language around them. And more importantly, I think we are still wading through, as we were saying, quite a number of the related tools that are built on top of it, these techniques that are helping to kind of compensate for some of the obvious limits that are of large language models functionalities. And so sort of to the first part of this question, I would say that at the moment, what we're looking at is still more on the side of experimentation than full-blown integration. And obviously, we've heard fantastic presentations about these deployed models and great use cases that we're seeing, but I think one of the operative words in the question that you posed here is useful. And I think that's a really important word here, because while we are beginning to integrate with these tools with our existing workflows, we're yet to see what are the outcomes of these new processes and these new skill sets that are going to develop, what skills are going to be antiquated. One of the analog examples I think about is cursive. When I was a kid, I was forced to learn how to write in cursive. And I used to wonder, why would I need this skill? And actually, and later on, I realized that in college and later that it was incredibly useful when it came to writing very quickly, taking notes very rapidly. For some people, it actually became a trade for them. They designed incredibly beautiful artwork out of it. And so when we talk about things like prompt engineering, these new skills that might be very useful in engaging with these tools, it might be playing a role that cursive writing was for me, where it was a great way to get to certain things faster or more efficiently, or some people are using it to kind of perfect a new trade, a new art. This is still incredibly underexplored because, as I said, we don't have the necessary, I think, perspective to think about full-blown integration at this point. And a lot of legal work, if we think about it, is implicit. I once heard that, a lot of lawyers have what they call their greatest hits, their best clauses that they keep to themselves. Sometimes you talk about it with one or two colleagues, but you don't always have this very, very fluid knowledge share, and actually these models have that potential to do that. And so sometimes I think about once we get past this stage and as we are having these conversations, we're moving from this is what's possible to now this is what's practical and what we could do when we integrate with these tools. For example, what I mean is that these models are capable very clearly of drafting a great first cut of a brief, a contract, but how do associates and counsel then react to them? How do we edit on top of them? What types of edits do we want to see from these first cuts? These are some questions that we'll be exploring in sort of the next stage. On the other hand, when we receive these complex legal analyses, as we teach these fundamental skills to our law students, how should they be kind of gathering from these analyses? Is this a way for them to build new arguments, maybe allow them to see perspectives from different angles? Or are they getting an opportunity to look at templates with very highly specific guided annotation so that when you hire new associates, you don't need to have that much practical training time. A lot of law firms might think about, when we hire a first-year associate fresh out of law school, we might need quite a bit of time to train them and get them, really to understand the tricks of the trade in a sense. Maybe these large language models can offer some of that insider mentorship and perspective. In some of our ongoing research, we talked a little bit about inter-annotator agreement. One of our ongoing research, thanks to our collaborators and partners at DLA Piper, we've been able to try to understand what is exactly legal expertise across seniority as well as specialization. What really is the value add of a partner? And what can you really learn from this partner, for example? And this is something that we can start doing because with these large language models, few shot training, in an environment that's very data scarce for the law, this could be really effective for these to be able to use these large language models. So what we're seeing is that these models, these technologies have the ability to potentially capture not only the diversity in our legal sort of opinions, and see it as a strength and an opportunity for more negotiation practice, mediation practice, litigation strategy. But to the second part of the question, there's no technology or tool without risk. And as we said, a lot of what is out there is a sort of imbalance between benefit and risk. And what we're starting to see is that there are really well thought out taxonomies of harm and risk being developed, but they're kind of developed in silos between the legal side and legal and policy, and on the other hand, kind of these technical taxonomies that are emerging here. And what we need is kind of alignment of both. And at the same time, they're sort of at a level of generality, I think, that doesn't necessarily translate all the time into possible uses and interactions in specific domains. And especially in the legal profession where there are such strong liability considerations, we do need this shared base vocabulary. We've heard from, I think, Damien, who is from Sally. They talked about this base ontology. We need that for harms and risks as well. And I think just as a good starting point, we might want to think about our current tools that we use every day as lawyers to write, be it in Office 365 or with Google Workspace. Slowly, these text editing platforms have done little things. I think maybe what Pablo had mentioned in one of our conversations was one of the greatest inventions was the little squiggle line in Microsoft Word, which kind of signals to you like, hey, this is a grammatical error, hey, this is a spelling error. More and more, we're going to see this type of creep, these little behaviors that nudge the way that we are going to be doing work, and we need to assess these types of nudges. Are they harmful and are they of risk? A lot of these harms and risks are not glaringly obvious, and so these are some use cases that we need to start evaluating. And some of the research that I think Bogdana here, we collaborate on frequently, as well as some of our collaborations with DLA Piper, we're going to venture into questions about AI auditing, as well as what it means to actually analyze contextualized risks. So I think I'll start there.
Great, thanks, Megan. So we're running low on time, but I want to see if there are any quick reactions from the panel. Benefits, risks of lawyers.
10 minutes.
Any reactions?
Can I, yeah, I just want to say, I think, do not underestimate at all the massive impact this is going to have on the entire legal ecosystem. So Megan, you're talking about hiring and training first-year associates. I think that model is at severe risk. I think what we do in institutions like this, like legal education, right? We've been trying, many of us have been trying for decades to say, what are we actually doing here? Are we training people well? I was on the ABA Legal Education Review Commission or whatever, trying to say, could we get out of the 19th century model of what it is to educate a lawyer? We're about to get just thrown off that cliff, I think. And I think there's going to be, Mark Chandler's here still, the massive re-equilibration of the capacity of clients to say, look, I'm not paying for any of that stuff anymore because I can get co-counsel to draft that memo in 2 minutes. And it's pretty good. It's good. So I think that's there. And the question about legal skills, like what is quality? Finally, we will try to say we do need to pay attention to that. What is it that we're really trying to train people to do? It better not be write a legal memo and cite the right cases, because the machines are doing that.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that. Law schools are struggling now. Those who are aware, which many are not, I'd say the majority are not quite on, but those who are aware are trying to figure out what are the skills we should be training students on in the era of large language models, and how do we test and assess students in the era of large language models. Completely agree. Any commentary on the uses or misuses in law, either today or in the future? I mean, I think one comment too is, you want to be wary using the raw technology today. That's, as Julian was saying, you want to wait until there's some process built on top of it, not only for obviously client confidentiality reasons. You could waive confidentiality accidentally, or if you put your client information into ChatGPT. So I'm sure there are lawyers out there doing that because it's so good, but I wouldn't recommend it, and certainly violates.
A really key point about case counsel too. I'm our co-counsel. I'm selling the product for you here, Pablo. They wipe the whole thing after an interaction. So nothing is getting stored and used in later training.
Bobby, you had a comment?
Thank you. And yeah, maybe to build on the point, Megan, you mentioned about algorithmic auditing, right? So currently, what are the frameworks that we're using? And of course, there's so much going on in terms of legislation and guidelines, best practices, but who really has access to sufficient amount of transparency to be able to audit this kind of models and how they're used?
Great. So moving on to our next topic, I'm going to return to something that Jillian said. You talked about access to justice and reducing the cost of law. I want to hear your thoughts on the ability of large language models to help in this way.
Yeah, this is just awesome. So when Ralph was giving his talk this morning, I had my computer open just to see when was it I was up here saying. I've been saying 2008, I think, is the first presentation that was about our business model for law sucks. And it is cutting off hundreds of millions of people, and the data he presented is, if anything, conservative on this point. And it's down to us, right? It's down to the regulatory regime. And at many of those conferences, I should have brought it up here. I've sort of been holding up my iPhone, for many years to say, why don't I have the app on this phone that I can just take a picture of the subpoena, whatever it is I just got, and what do I do? And we have that technology like times 1,000 at this point. And the only thing that will stand in the way of making that available, and that's why it was fantastic to hear from those entrepreneurs that was on the earlier panel this morning. The only thing standing in the way there are our rules. And Ralph went through them. Let's say this could be the unauthorized practice of law. You can't get venture capital. You can't build this product anywhere except Utah. Please, somebody make sure Utah does not go out of business. They're at risk. Anybody who's got some money, talk to Lucy Rica. There she is. And that is going to be an absolute travesty. So here's my, so I've already, sung the praises of co-counsel from Casetext. Fantastic, awesome, going to have an incredible impact on, and yet again, it will be available to corporate clients and law firms. And we should absolutely be building this. This is the lawyer in your pocket, your friend, to help you out with these things. And this is why I'm emphasizing the reliability of the system that they've built. It is reliable, and it just needs to be built. It needs to be built, and that requires that it has never been more urgent to change those rules. Never more urgent than it is right now, and I think it'll be a travesty. So I think the capacity, the potential for this is phenomenal, and the fact that we've got co-counsel, you've got Harvey, you've got there's at least 2 or 3 other ones that have also partnered with OpenAI. Ironclad and anyways, others that. But right, we could have them available right now to people, and that's what we should be doing. And we should not let this drive yet another wedge in our legal profession that just further increases. This is actually my biggest concern about this, is that now your landlord's going to have the tool, now the company's going to have the tool, now your employer's going to have the tool, and you got nothing, right? So that's, I think this is an awesome technology, and it can be built in ways that are safe and reliable, and at least as good, probably better than the lawyer you're hiring for that help. Most of you we can't hire anybody, but even better. So I just think that's something to recognize about this moment. And Ralph had his call to action at the beginning. I just want to really emphasize this. This is the moment. This is the moment.
Thank you, Jillian. And I want to emphasize that. I think that now is the time to take advantage of these tools, and let's build it here at Stanford. Let's make it free. Let's make it open source, so that anyone who doesn't have limited access to justice, let's give them access to justice. I completely agree. So my last question, because we're running low on time, I want to ask Bobby. I know you've been doing some really interesting interdisciplinary research. So where do you think this technology going with respect to other disciplines such as cognitive science and AI and social cohesion?
Yeah, thank you, Harry. So 4 things, and I'm going to be brief, I promise. So verifiability, contestability, legal design, and social cohesion. So by verifiability, actually, I'm very much inspired by Professor Hatfield's work together with others at OpenAI. There was this paper called Towards Trustworthy AI Through Verifiable Claims, which I think inspired a lot of our work with Megan to think about verification, right? And what does verification mean in the context of interacting with algorithmic systems? And there is, of course, a whole field of formal methods that looks at formal verification. And, but there are other kinds of verifiability there and informal methods for verification in terms of what does sufficient amount of evidence mean in the context of having certain kind of claim and really thinking about contestability, right? So who has access to disagree, challenge, dispute, or otherwise express some disagreement with not necessarily the outcome of an algorithmic decision or their sort of conversation with the AI, but along the life cycle of the AI. Currently, I'm sure you've seen there's a lot of screenshots running around, but surely that's not like the best way to think about contestability. And really, what does it mean to have legal socio-technical infrastructure that will support people when there's friction between them and these kind of language models, right? And it's important to think about that going forward. And then this is where legal design research, and particularly actually Professor Margaret Hagan's work has been super inspiring for our collaborations to think about this particular paper on legal design as a theory of change and a set of methods to craft legal systems. So how do we think about a theory of change towards another kind of human-centered, participatory, community-oriented co-design, right, of social, computational, and legal agreements in the context of how do we think about social norms and social agreements, and really thinking about something like social cohesion and the design of interventions that can enable better and different kind of cooperation. And then coming back to the legal domain, lastly, I'm going to come back to what Megan mentioned briefly about taxonomies and maybe in particular domain-specific ontologies, and really a formal way to describe knowledge as a set of concepts and relationships between them, and really leverage this sort of domain-specific knowledge in the way that the systems are being trained and built. And I think we already mentioned this method around reinforcement learning from AI feedback. So these kind of methods, actually, there's another paper called Constitutional AI by Anthropic that really uses this kind of what's called a rule-based constitution in natural language that sort of governs the training procedure. So we're currently, together with Megan, working on something that is really experimenting around using logic programming and other kinds of symbolic paradigms around how do we turn that constitution from natural language to a logic programming program to enable a better and more granular level of understanding and complexity in this sort of like constitution that is now guiding the training procedure. And we're super excited and looking for collaborators. So if you're interested in verifiability and this kind of symbolic approach, definitely reach out.
Thank you, Bobby. That's amazing research. So this was a fascinating conversation with an expert panel. Please join me in thanking our excellent panelists.